Hey everybody, how we doing tonight? It's Jerry Rasco, and we are back. So, little bit different format for tonight. Most of the time, when I'm here with you live, you're seeing updates on different projects that I'm working on, or you're seeing my art that I'm working on, something like that. But we've got a really fun, interesting thing that I wanted to bring to everybody here today. We have got a friend of the channel joining me tonight, and we're going to talk to him about Marvel, Spider-Man, and Steve Ditko, some of the big three that if you're a fan of my channel and you've been watching my Spider-Man retrospectives, you know that I love all three of those things. So Nick Caputo is my guest tonight, and we've got his link to his blog down here. So if you do get a chance after the video, check it out. Let him know what you think. Very excited. With no further ado, let me bring in the guest of honor, Mr. Nick Caputo.
Thank you,
Nick,
Jerry. Great to
how
be
are
here.
you? Thank you.
Good.
Super excited. I'm all jazzed up. I love the topic. I love the stuff. I'm very passionate. I know you're obviously very passionate as well about this.
Yeah.
So I'm super excited to get down into it and talk some more Spider-Man with you. But first, if you wouldn't mind, give us just a little bit of your origin story. Tell us, how did you get into comics and kind of where that love came from?
Well, I have to say, when I was a little kid, my older brother, John, 7 years older than I, always had comics in the house. And once I started to read, I started following what he had up there. He had some DCs, but he had a lot of Marvels. Started collecting them in the mid-'60s, early '60s. And just got started with that. And from then on, just grew. I mean, I started collecting myself after a while when I became a teenager. But all those years, I get these books for free, go to the candy store, pick all these things up, the monthly Marvel comics, and then the Charltons and Warren and DC, and whatever else you could afford from time to time. And you just got into it, and then got into the history very early on.
Once the comic bug bites you, it is a lifetime obsession. Yeah. I don't know anybody who has who's gotten into it who then later in life was like, yeah, I can take it or leave it. I mean, it's once it's in your blood, comics is in your blood. So you mentioned a bunch of different things. You mentioned Marvel, early Marvel. So I'm assuming obviously you're looking at things like Fantastic Four, Hulk, Thor, stuff like that. You mentioned DC, you mentioned Charlton. So what attracted you to Spider-Man per se?
Well, it was the monthly drama. I have to say, you waited every month, 30 days for that next comic to come out. And the covers, I mean, I was reading it during the Romita reign, even though I was reading Marvel Tales. And my brother had a lot of the earliest Spider-Man Ditko issues. But every issue that was, continued, the covers were incredible. The storylines, the plots, you wanted to know what was going to happen every month, like a serial, like a soap opera. That was the drama of what's happening to the characters. And you got into it, that was a big part of it.
I agree. I think that to me has always been something that attracted me to Spider-Man, as opposed to maybe say like the Fantastic Four, that they had interpersonal stuff, but it didn't seem the galactic overarching thing seemed to be much bigger. Whereas Peter Parker seemed like a real fleshed out person with his real problems that you could relate to, whether it's school or bullies or,
had a whole cast of characters,
Yeah. And it just felt more relatable. I know that's what attracted me.
I like the solo hero a little more than the team books. I mean, I love the FF and I love some of the other team books, but I like the solo characters much more. And a character like that, teenager, you could really relate to the character when you're growing up.
Right. Agreed. Totally. That's my feeling as well. So we were talking backstage. You mentioned you have a pretty extensive Spider-Man collection. If you don't mind sharing, let the folks know so they could be jealous as to kind of what your
I have all the Ditko issues from 2 Up, so I've got all of those. I'm happy I have those, and reprints of the rest of the stuff, and probably issues up to like 100. 99, 100 of Amazing Spider-Man, and assorted issues here and there, but that's quite a bit of the stuff I grew up with,
Right. So, I know in my series that I've been doing, we're looking at a new issue of Spider-Man every week. And I, first of all, I want to thank you so much for your participation with the comments and the video. It's been
No
great.
problem. Glad to
I
help.
I really appreciate it. Um, so I did want to know, like, when we looked at the first annual number one, the copies that I have are from 2004 from a product that Marvel put out where they
Right.
scan the PDFs. So you're seeing actual scans of real issues.
Hmm.
You see the yellowing, you see the original
Yeah.
ads, you see all that stuff. The annual, though, was not part of that collection for some reason. So I had to
Okay.
go online and find a digital copy of the annual.
Right.
And one of the things that I pointed out in my video was the disparity between that original coloring on newsprint and
Oh
that
yeah.
sort of revamped computer coloring. I'm just curious, as a collector, sort of what are your thoughts on with reprints and when they're touching them up now with computer technology and stuff? How do you feel about that?
I always like to keep it as close as possible to the original. I don't mind some fixing or correction of stuff, but I mean, some of the things they've done are just really too far out for me. I like it closer to the original look and feel of the books. And some of those cases they do that, and in other cases they don't. I just don't think for me, it doesn't work as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think, I pointed out in a couple of places in that annual where just something trying to do a computer gradient of a sky in the background really took me out of
Yeah. Yeah.
that imagery, right? Because I'm looking at that as opposed to just
Yeah. You're
being
just
engrossed
updating it
in.
for a different period, a different era. And some
Exactly.
people like that, but I just don't think it works.
Agreed 100%. So we've
By
already
the way,
talked about. Oh,
oh no, I didn't have it.
yeah.
I was going to show you the Amazing Spider-Man 17 cover you mentioned the other week.
Okay.
You're correct. I have the original there, and yes, you see gradations in the back of blue, darker blue,
Yes.
darker. Stan Goldberg probably called it. It goes from light blue to darker blue to like a purplish, but it was
Yeah.
no black there.
No.
But it did, as you saw that cover there, it was different. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is one of the downsides to those scans,
Yeah.
unfortunately, is that sometimes can wash things out. But on the flip side, I like seeing it on newsprint. I mean, I think if people aren't involved in the printing industry and stuff the way that I have been a little bit here
Right.
as a self-publisher, you don't understand that how you have to plan your colors and your ink based on the material you're putting it on. It works differently when you print it on newsprint versus today's modern
Oh,
print stock.
definitely.
And so the best artists were taking advantage of that situation. The best early colorists were taking advantage of that situation for sure. And you can really see it in some of those early issues.
Oh yeah. And they knew what
I,
they had, what they could use, what tools they had available to them. So,
yes. And I love the original. You see the original house ads, the
oh,
original
great.
other
Yeah.
ads. Those are terrific, right?
They're great to see.
Yeah, for sure. So we mentioned briefly here, of course, Spider-Man, and the premier original artist of Spider-Man is one Steve Ditko.
Right.
A lot of people, your casual fans, I have to educate them on that all the time. They say Stan Lee made Spider-Man. You go, well, Stan Lee wrote Spider-Man and co-created, but
Steve
the
and
artist,
Stan together. Yeah.
Steve
I
and
mean,
Stan,
Ditko did most of the visual, the whole design, everything came from him.
exactly.
They had to approve of he came up with the full face mask.
Yep.
Initially, he said he got some feedback, didn't like that, or the publisher wasn't too crazy about that. But
Right.
And the whole design of the costume, everything came from him, and then a lot of the design elements and some of the weapons that he used,
Okay.
and the spider signal, and I mean all of that stuff, the web
Yeah.
shooters, all of this ideas came from him initially.
Have you
that's
seen
even the crawling thing they did not
oh,
originally want to do, according to Ditko in the Amazing Fantasy 15. He had these weird crawling up the wall and everything. He looked weird, and Stan said, I don't know if the comics code's going to like this, and Ditko just said, well, let's see what happens, because they were very picky back then. Very picky, too sinister, too scary, whatever. He said, let's just go with it, see if they say anything. And he went ahead and kept it. He kept that trademark look.
And you know what? Today you can see the lineage of that. I mean, just about any artist today who's drawing Spider-Man
definitely
climbing in a wall, uses that model of, and I've mentioned it in my videos, all the weight is on the
Oh,
fingertips, or all
yes,
the weight
yes.
is on the toes, and really emphasizing that adhesion and how kind of, again, like you said, that creepy spider crawling.
Yeah.
And that's all comes from Steve and his imagination, which again, I think so many people just don't know.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate, but I mean, he did a lot of the came up with a lot of characters, came up with a lot of designs, ideas, characters, villains. I mean, so
Right.
much. I don't know what part of the creative cast of characters he did, but he might have come up with some of them on his own. I don't know,
Right.
but he certainly made them unique. You mentioned
Yes.
Aunt May, and the wrinkles and everything else. And yeah, you're right about that. I was reading something from him the other day, and see if I can find it about Aunt May. This is what he said. Aunt May developed from her first appearance as a plump, jovial woman, Amazing Fantasy 15, in the way I believe she worked best for the Peter Parker Spider-Man story world. The tragic death of her husband, Ben, meant Aunt May would have the sole responsibility for raising her nephew, Peter Parker. That alone would have placed a worrisome burden on her. It could explain the change in her appearance and correctness of her looks if her visual appearance needed any justifying. Because he was saying they were getting complaints about Aunt May from the letter writers saying she's too old, she's ugly, she's this and that, and Stan took these things seriously, and he said, "This is the way she is, that's the way I draw her."
Yeah. I've mentioned it. Yeah. In my videos, it's something that we look at a lot. From, again, all the Spider-Man videos. If anybody's checking out this video today and you haven't seen my YouTube channel, I have a playlist. It comes out every Monday. There's a new episode where I go through the next issue of Amazing Spider-Man. We talk about the artistic elements to it, how the storytelling is put together, stuff like that. And one of the biggest things I found going through this is Steve's ability to draw unique characters, even in a one panel shot in the background. There's still a unique face, a unique body language,
Yeah, I like the way you
clothing.
pointed that out. That was a big
He's
thing.
Yeah, he's never putting the same people twice and in a background or something like that. They're all realized.
Yeah.
And that's something, again, if you look at somebody like a Jack Kirby, who gets all due credit to Jack and what he did, he had a body type. He had a face. Your men's faces look like this, and maybe you change the hair. You put a hat on a guy, but the face structure is pretty much the same. Steve really took, and that's why I wondered at some point, I mentioned, and I think we had a little comment discussion, was I wondered if Steve had any background in animation, because so much of that looks like almost not breakdowns isn't the right term. That's a comic book term.
Storyboards.
Like storyboards, yeah,
Yeah.
for an animation where you would
As
show
far as I
that
know, never did
motion.
any animation. Didn't work in any animated studio.
Well, he missed out, or they missed out on
May have
him
absorbed
because,
things from animation, 'cause
right,
he really
right.
picked up on a lot of things. So he might have just studied the cartoons, studied the animated cartoons as possible,
Yeah.
and absorbed them. But he would get all these issues. Even Jameson, like you said, when you open the next issue and just take a look at that first page, because he said he was getting complaints about James. He's too nasty. He's too mean. He doesn't treat Peter right. He's always being treated poorly by by Jameson, and his face. So he made the biggest smile. They hated the smiles that he had. So he came up with the first full page there, where you see his splash page with his face smiling. He's smiling throughout the whole issue because Spider-Man's in trouble.
Right.
So he just have fun with it. He said, "This is a guy you're supposed to love to hate." He's not
Exactly.
not a great guy. He's a troublesome guy once in a while.
Yeah.
So you got to play with it. The audience has to enjoy that.
Yeah, the characters are phenomenal. It really is an amazing job of having, like I said, your Flash Thompson doesn't have the same body type as Peter.
No.
Liz Allen doesn't look like Betty Brant.
No.
They really, really unique, and that's time consuming when you're working on a deadline. So you roughly have about 3.5 weeks a month to get a monthly comic book done.
Yes,
and these old ones were longer than the modern ones.
Yeah.
So he's drawing even more pages. That's a lot of time. And I want to talk about this. Steve Ditko is inking himself, which is kind of, until today's digital era, was unheard of for a long time. So, do you have any information about Steve, and did he talk about his inking, his approach, or his tools, or anything like that? Because
Oh, yeah,
I
so
had
from
no idea
time
until
to
I got back into this.
yeah, from time to time, yeah, he did the complete package, and it was a lot of work. I
Yeah,
mean, had different techniques, but what he said in his essays, he would. This is what I mean by being so precise in those early days. He would go after a plot synopsis from Stan. They discussed it in the office or whatever. Do the 21 page story, pen and pencil, and then he'd bring it in and go from page to page, panel to panel with Stan. Is there anything you don't like here you want to change? Is something you're not happy with? So he'd do that whole thing before he went into the ink. It then had to be lettered and
yeah,
then inked by him. So it was a thorough, it was very thorough. And I heard he did that even in the later years, in the 80s or so, when he was doing a strip, bring it to the editor, go page by page, panel by panel, and look at it precisely. This is why I did this. This is why I did that. So that's how
wow.
thorough he was.
So he must have been, I don't know if this is documented anywhere, but I can assume that he must have been able to do at least a page, if not a page and a half a day in terms of a pace, right?
Yeah, I don't know what his pace was, but I suspected probably something like that. He did a lot of work, 20
Yeah,
to 30 pages at least when he was not working for Charlton. And he did work for Charlton while he was at Marvel too from time to time.
right.
Uh, at least 30 pages then. Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, 20, 30, 31, 32 pages a month uh,
Wow.
at times. So, he had to be pretty, pretty good to do that many pages.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. Like I said, especially then if you're going full pencils, then to inks, then you've got the letter, and this is a time when they were lettering on the boards. This isn't putting it in after the
Yeah, no,
fact
we'll
like
go
we
to
do
the
today.
artist. He'd pencil it first, then get a script from Stan, dialogue from Stan. He'd give it to the letterer, Artie Simic or Sam Rosen. They'd have to letter it and give it
Yep,
back to Stan or the office, and then Ditko get it back to finish inking. And if it was late or something else, you got to rush to get that done. You had a
right.
deadline.
Yeah. And,
Hopefully ahead of time, it's great. But if you're on a deadline, you got a week or so to finish 20, 21 pages. That's a lot of work.
and we're going through, so in my series, I think I'm up to, I think my next issue is issue 18, if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken. Um, are you aware of it with his original run? Did he have any fill-ins? Because so far it's been
No.
incredibly consistent.
No fill-ins.
Wow.
Then eighth issue that had a Jack Kirby story in the back. I don't know what happened. Yeah, I get the feeling. I don't think he was too happy about not doing the complete issue, but I get the feeling he was needed to ink something because a lot of times there was rush work, and he'd ask one of the guys to finish inking a job. Somebody didn't make it. There was a problem, and he would do the job. But they might have taken him off doing the other story. He needed help with something, and he inked a couple of issues of Kirby's Giant Man. He inked the FF. He did some other inking stuff, so that might have been the reason why. Other than that, I think he was devoted to doing the Spider-Man work and completely his.
Right. And
Almost,
I'm
yeah, Doctor Strange too.
yeah, I'm assuming it was the same thing as it is today to this point, where if you pencil, you get a rate. If you ink, you get a rate. If you're penciling and inking your own stuff, it's a way for you to make more money.
Oh, sure.
And and I know that was one of the things that Jack Kirby had said was, you worked fast and he did multiple books because to him it was a 9 to 5
Yeah,
job, no different than roofing or bricklaying.
that was it. It was a job.
You get your work done, and so you do as much as you can. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Joey Lee says, "Cool. Did Charles Schultz have people to do his work, or did he do it essentially alone?"
I think he did it alone, although he
I
did, as my friend Michael Fasala would say, he also had help doing some of the comic books, comic strips, comic books for some of the companies. I think others did that and maybe some advertising work. But he did as far as I know, he did the strips by himself.
I think you're right.
By himself. Solo.
Yeah, the original paper strips, and then once it got serialized, or I guess once it got licensed to things like you said, like comic books or other media, there was probably other help at that point.
Yeah,
I think
so.
Pretty common. Yeah. Cool. So, with your Spider-Man collection and with your interest in Spider-Man, kind of how far has it gone? Are you still reading Spider-Man today, or did it kind of peter out at some point? No pun
Yeah,
intended.
kind of finished with that. I mean, I read it for many, many years. I'll say that.
Yeah,
And it kind of, by the time I was getting older, it was getting a bit stale. It
yeah,
was getting a bit, I read these stories before because they were redoing a lot of stuff that was kind of followed early stuff, lead to go stuff early on. I'm like, oh, I think this goblin story is like that goblin story. I don't know if it was
right,
done purposely, if they just, from memory or whatever, but and
yeah,
repetitious, and there was no movement, character
right.
wasn't changing. Uh,
It's a
so
great
it
point.
kind of, yeah, I'd read them from time to time, and if a new different artist comes in, you see what they do. But yeah, kind of by the '70s, mid '70s or so, kind of got. Keep reading stuff, but not the same interest.
Right. It's a very interesting point about the time and stuff, because obviously we know today that comic books are sort of live in a sliding time scale, right?
Yeah,
Peter ages to a certain point and then sort of has stopped
right.
and isn't really continuing. But in those early days, it was it wasn't real time, but he was aging. People were going through things. He went through high school, and then he graduates high school. He goes to college. He's in college for a while. Things, are progressing and changing
Yeah, I always
in a
wondered
in a way
about
that we didn't
that
see. Yeah.
because Lee and Nico weren't talking to each other, and I'm like, how did they get to that college issue? Because they weren't speaking at that point. After number 25, 24, they weren't talking at all. Uh, and it was always bugging me because they said it's probably Stan's idea because he did it in Patsy Walker. He had storylines where she finished high school, got a
Right.
job, left college. I saw that. First time I saw that, I said, wow. I said he probably, and then he did it with Johnny Storm later on, or he and
Right.
Kirby did it with Johnny Storm. I get the feeling it was a Lee idea. And then at
Okay.
one time, in one of Ditko's essays, finally years later, he said, I came into the office one day and I asked Flo Steinberg, Stan's secretary, does Stan want me to have Peter graduate? And she said, I'll ask him. I'll let you know. And he said, okay. And there's the story. That's
There
how we
you go.
got it.
I mean, sometimes it's that simple, right? You ask
Yeah.
the question, or somebody has a bit of an idea, and you go, Peter graduates. There's an issue.
Yeah,
It's a
it
whole
was never
issue.
resolved when they were talking to each other. It was, and later, as Ditko probably said, he probably felt it would keep him as a teenager might be better than
Hmm.
to age him. But once he came up with the decided, fine, all right, let's do it.
Let's do it. Yeah.
We're gonna make him
Um,
an adult now.
you mentioned Steve's essays, and I know I've read in history that he was a fairly prolific writer of these essays, where he was talking about his experiences, his work experiences, his history, stuff like
Right.
that. Can you tell us a little bit about Steve's essays and sort of where that comes from, and
Well, he
any?
was working with his friend and a publisher, co-author, co-worker, Robin Snyder, for 30 years, over 30 years, and he published all the essays he did, what he wanted to write about, what he felt like talking about, and he did a lot of essays on early Marvel stuff, on Spider-Man, on the business, and that's where you got a lot of information. And yeah, that was great that he did that,
Yeah.
But yes, he went into detail on some of the early stuff and what he did, what his contributions were, why he's a co-creator and not just a artist. How fully involved he was, and yeah, those pieces are out there. People want to and then probably collect them one day. There'll be a collection of some of the work out there. But he did a lot of writing, and that's the way he
Yeah.
liked to communicate.
Right. Yeah. I know he was. I've seen there's been postings, I think, of some letters that he wrote
Yeah.
I think it was to, I want to say it was to like the press, like the Associated Press or something like that, talking about, again, his background and his experiences and with
Well, he
Stan.
wrote to fans, and he did a lot of work
Yeah.
for fans early on. I did a blog post about all the fan art and all the work he did in the fanzines for many, many years, and he did a lot of illustrations, a lot of stories. Did his Mr. A a lot of times, and stuff for these small publications, and got them out there. So he did that for many, many years. So, and he was friends with some of the fans. I communicated with them for a number of years.
Oh, that's
through
awesome.
the mail. I wrote to him after many years. I said, might as well write to the guy, just say hello, thank you for
Right.
this, and wrote back to me a week or two later. And very fun, very pleasant communications.
That is awesome. I'm
Yeah.
going to grab this comment real quick, and then we're going to segue into your blog because that is
Okay.
perfect. So Joey again asked, did Looney Tunes, Disney, I guess, did Looney Tunes and Disney
Yeah.
start off as comics, then grew into animation? They often talk about Mel Blanc, who did the voices, but they don't mention any person that did all the character illustrations. Um, so no, they were definitely cartoons first.
Cartoons first, yeah, and you had a lot
Yeah,
of different illustrated cartoonists working there. And then it went into the comics early on, Dell Comics and
mhm,
all the early stuff. It quickly went to the comic strips, comic magazines. They were
right,
very popular, especially starting early on. And then they were on
absolutely.
for decades, decades and decades, being Dell, Gold Key, and
Yep.
lots of other comic publishers too.
Yeah. And usually you don't hear about individual illustrators through the studios. You usually hear about the directors
Yeah,
who manage it. They tend to be more, unfortunately, some of those early illustrators, animators, their names are lost to time,
yeah.
unfortunately.
You have to really search it out.
It,
There's a lot of books about the history of Warner Brothers or Fleischer, Disney. There's a lot there where they are mentioned and discussed. But yeah, you got to look it up. You really have to
yeah.
search a lot of the stuff out.
And likewise, you have to know that it was looked at as just a pure industry,
Oh,
just
sure.
like making a car. It's assembly line. The people doing it aren't as important necessarily as the end product. It wasn't looked, especially as I can talk comics, but it wasn't looked at as fine art. It was
No.
just a commercial product. So move it through and everybody get to the next one. So again, a lot of people that worked on these books, colorists, letterers, inkers, again, unless you do a lot of deep research, sometimes that is lost to time. And unfortunately, so is the art. A lot of this original early art, you mentioned, so Steve brings in the artwork. He goes, my art was all finished. I need to have lettering put on it. We need to have coloring. We got to do all this stuff
Whole
to
process.
get to production. And then Marvel will just take those pages and go, thanks. And
Yeah.
it went in a big giant room and they cut it up. They'd use it as scrap paper or all kinds of things. So there's unfortunately, a lot of original art of that early era that's lost.
Lost.
Yeah.
Lost.
Very sad. But on a happy note, let's talk about your blog because this is a really cool
Well,
font of information. And I have been interested I've been digging through it a little bit here and there. So tell us about how that got started. And I am going to try to pull it up so folks can see.
well, geez, it's been going on since what, 2010, I think. Uh, I just, I've written some articles and stuff. I've been in some of the magazines and fanzines and other places, but just decided to come up with an idea of doing it online. And, it's not only putting it together, come up with an idea for a blog, a piece on somebody, on something. Then you have to put the visual together, which is
Right.
another. Sometimes that takes more time than the writing of it. It's just a lot of figuring out what you want to put there. What images you need. It's mostly for my collection. Sometimes I get from other areas, but a lot of stuff I use from my collection. And the visual is important, so I try my best to come up with the right images, the right pictures, and try to come up with some good stories. And, part of it is somebody said, what's the word? Nostalgic in a way, but also I try to put the factual stuff and the information out there for people that
Yeah.
don't know or have it. That's a big thing. And credit the people that did the work. I've done pieces on letterers. I've done pieces on different people in the industry that don't get that much attention. I think
Right.
that's important too, because yes, we could talk. I've done a lot of stuff on Ditko. I've done stuff on Kirby. I've done on other big names, but I've also done pieces on the fanzine, the writers, the people that did produce these books. I did one recently on the Comic Cons that I grew up with during the 60s and 70s, 80s, 90s, and how that came together, people that worked on it back then. And these people don't get a lot of attention for the most part because we're all concentrating on the latest stuff. But I put that out and people enjoy it. Hopefully, I've done
Yeah.
stuff on not just Marvel all the time. I'll do stuff on Charlton. I've done whole history of the comic reader fanzine. Different people that don't get that much attention, and I've done stuff on collecting the gum cards when I was a kid,
Oh, cool. Yeah.
which was a big thing. Buying comics every month and the newsstand, what that was like back in the 60s. And I think contingent of people like that. And I do stuff like every year I do an annual piece, whether an old one or a new one. I do what it was like. I did a thing on Amazing Spider-Man Annual 1,
Yeah.
Amazing Spider-Man Annual 2, Marvel Tales Annual, Fantastic Four. And people get a kick out of that because it's those were special issues.
Absolutely.
Really nicely done.
Yeah, this is phenomenal. I mean, there's so much history and information here. This is great.
Oh, thank you.
I love those the convention guides or or whatever you want to call them there, and going through and seeing like, oh my God, there's a Miller, there's a Wrightson one.
Oh, they're all involved. Yeah, a lot of these
yeah.
guys were always doing stuff for the fanzines, for the conventions.
Simonson, Iron Man.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
they did all the sketches and work, and like I said, when I used to go there, you'd get a sketch for free.
Right.
I mean, that was it. Nothing was charged back then. You would just go in. I put that up on mine. I had Don Heck drew a little Iron Man sketch for me. John Romita drew a Daredevil sketch. I did with Marie Severin, all these people you just go to. Can you draw this for me? Sure. I mean, it's changed now. And obviously artists need to make money, and it's a business, but as a kid, you didn't think about that. Back then they just did it. It was a new thing.
Right. Yeah. I don't do it as much anymore as I used to. I may only get to one or two conventions these days, but I used to go and have a booth at upwards of 10 to 12 conventions a year and do sketches, do commissions,
right.
Sell stuff, things like that. And it's pretty interesting that became something you had to do to make money, because realistically page rates they're not paying the bills. It's that secondary market of selling original art, selling your sketches, art stuff, things like that. And now it's just autographs because of the collector market, right? That's the big one now. People charge just to sign stuff, let alone give you a drawing or something like that. So it's really changed a lot, even in the 20 something years that I've been involved in it.
Oh, sure.
But man, it's really cool. It makes you wish I had a time machine. I wish I could go back to those old artist alleys. That would be amazing.
It was great to be there, and I got to meet so many of these people I grew up with, and talk to them, which was nice. Right. Especially people like Gene Colan. We used to see at the conventions all the time. Dick Ayers, John Romita, Gil Kane. These are people you could sit there. Can I ask you a few questions? Herb Trimpe, Stan Goldberg, who's a really great guy, fun to talk to. We'd walk in sometimes. I remember one convention we went over there. Was a ton of people there, and he saw us. Me and my friend Mike Vassallo and Barry Pearl, and said, "Oh, the Three Stooges." He pointed us. He saw us. He said, "Hey, thanks, Dan." But it was just a pleasure to meet these guys. And most of them were all nice. Steranko.
Yeah.
I
met Jim Steranko. Short guy, little guy, but super nice, very friendly.
Very nice. And we were telling him one time, Captain America story that he did. It did 2 issues, and then the 3rd issue, they were worried about it being late, talking about deadlines, and they were worried in the office, and they said, "Let's call Kirby. We got to do a fill-in issue. He's not going to get this done in time." It was like the last minute. And Kirby just said, "What's the continuity? He's dead. He was killed at the end of the thing." He says, "You want me to bring him back?" He says, "No, we want you to keep him dead." And he did a 20-page story from that.
Wow.
And over the weekend, 20 pages. And it looks phenomenal. George Tusky inked it. And you look at it, it's like, wow, it's like, a lot of big panels and stuff.
Yeah.
Whole history of Captain America, little things from the 40s, 50s, and into the present time when he was drawing it. And I told that direct, I said, Jim, he said, I thought he was dead. I was a kid here. A month passes, memorial issue. And I don't think you got that. He said, really? I said, yeah. I said, that worked better for you. When you did the next issue, we really thought a lot of people were just shocked.
That's awesome. It's so funny. We think as readers and people who are consuming this media that it's all planned out.
No.
They've got it all together. Sometimes these guys are working and gals and people, everybody are working by the seat of their pants month to month, just trying to come up with the next new idea and
deadlines
and just get something out there. And that's the whole thing. Good, bad, or indifferent. It's got to
get something out
there. So. Exactly. Real quick, I have 2 convention stories I'll tell you. So the first convention I ever did as an artist was in Dallas, and I didn't really look ahead. I sent in all my information. They tell you, here's your table number. You go sit down at your table. I don't know who's going to be in Artist Alley with me.
Right.
And I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, Will Spartaccio and his wife come over and sit down next to me. Oh. And I'm like, that's really cool. Like, this is one of the guys that founded Image Comics. He's a huge superstar. This is amazing. So people start coming to him. He's doing sketches. He's signing stuff. And there's this huge line all the way down the row. And after an hour or two, his wife kind of taps me on the shoulder and she's like, I'm so sorry. We just realized our line is completely in front of your table, so nobody can see your stuff. Would you like us to have the convention come and move the line, in the other direction so people can get to your table?
Right.
And I said, absolutely not. I have a captive audience right here. And as they're waiting for you, they're buying from me. So I'll keep it coming. It's great. And she was like,
it works.
Yeah. They were so nice. Super, super great.
Yeah.
And then the other one is I was at a show in San Antonio, and the table next to me, the guy didn't show up. So there's an empty table. Now, on the back side of that table, of all people, is Neil Adams. And Neil Adams, for anybody who doesn't know, Neil Adams, obviously one of the great illustrators in comics history. He did the very famous Muhammad Ali versus Superman book you may have seen, and just considered an all-around great, but very well known for being a very brusque, very rough kind of guy. He was not friendly to other artists necessarily, but anyway, he was a big proponent of creators' rights. So, right. I mean, Neil did a lot of great things. So again, all of a sudden I'm working and there's this figure on my right, and I turn and it's him. And if you ever saw Neil Adams, he always had that blue button-up dress shirt.
Yeah.
And it's right. So he's standing there in his blue button-up dress shirt, bigger than life. And he's like, excuse me. He's like, is there anybody at this table? And I said, I've been here all day. Nobody's shown up. He's like,
right.
Would you mind if I took down my partition in the middle and just kind of combined? So I had one giant big thing. And I went, you're Neil Adams. I'm pretty sure you could do anything you want. And right. He's like, well, I appreciate that, but I just want to, I don't want to be a rude neighbor. And I was like, no, of course, please. He couldn't have been nicer. He was super nice to my daughter who came. She was little at the time.
Right.
Couldn't have been a better convention neighbor. So people always have these horror stories of Neil Adams made me cry. He looked at my portfolio and told me I should set fire to it and stuff. And I had nothing but a great experience with the guy. So yeah.
That's nice to hear.
Yeah. So that's one of the great things. You do find that these creators tend to be isolated, right? We sit here, you see kind of over here, I've got my drawing stuff, my board. We're here all day, every day, working, creating. We don't get to interact as much as we would like to. Today, with the digital world, obviously, we have more.
It's more open.
Yeah. But back then, those conventions were really important for networking, getting to see the fans, getting the reactions, hearing what people like and don't like, and then being able to adjust. That was a really big thing.
It was. Just to be able to go up and talk to them and say hello. Yeah. Have a couple of words, ask them a couple of questions. And almost all of them are engaging.
Yes. I mean, you don't create something and not have a passion for it to some degree. So having people ask you questions about the things you did, why did you do this? Or what's going to happen next? Or what's why'd you make this decision? Or, it's, they're interested. Um, about your blog. So tell me, do you have like a schedule right now that you're looking to do, or is it just sort of when the spirit hits you, or you have a good topic to do? How's
Yeah, I
that
always try to
going?
find something of interest. I don't want to just do an X one for no reason, or just to
Right.
do it for a schedule. I just try to come up with something different, and then I'll spend a lot of time on it. You know, the
Yeah.
I don't even know what I came up with the convention thing, because I wasn't thinking of doing anything, and I was probably looking at some of my old conventions booklets and it's like, oh, should talk about when this started or when the early days of the convention time in New York City. Uh, and then I came up with an idea and, just worked on that. But yeah,
So
it takes time sometimes to come up with something really, really worthwhile.
right. I struggled for quite a while until coming on to this idea of like I'm going to review these Spider-Man
Yeah.
comics
Yeah.
because it was something that obviously is linear, right? I can go issue to issue and then I can make it regular. Whereas if I was looking at, well, this is a good one, this is here a
Yeah.
random issue here or there, I'm not gonna have a regular schedule.
No,
So
it's a
that was
good way to do it.
yeah, thanks. So obviously you can tell if anybody can't tell by Nick's accent, Nick is a New Yorker.
I'm a New
Um,
Yorker.
have you I'm sure you must have you been to the old Marvel office, the old DC offices back in the day?
No, no. Well, I was the DC offices. I worked close to there at one point. Not to Marvel, though. Never made it
Okay.
to the Marvel offices. But yeah, DC offices, not the early days, though. Did not get to see that. I know people went there. People stop in. I knew Flo Steinberg. We became friendly with her for a time. And people would just come in out of nowhere and stop in and say hello or want to
Yeah.
see the people. And, sometimes could do it. Sometimes she said, we're busy. Everybody's doing something. Yeah. It's a business, kids come in, they don't realize it. But,
Right.
once in a while, somebody might step out and say hello. Heard Marie Severin at times would walk and say, oh, who is it? Oh, yeah, stop by for a minute. And she showed him a few pointers and
Right.
showed some original artwork, sketches and stuff. So, yeah, that happened to quite a few people.
Yeah. I used to go into Manhattan pretty regularly for business, and
Right.
one day I was like, I've got time to kill. I'm gonna check it out. And I was in a
Okay.
suit and tie, and I went to the office and I went up. Now, unfortunately, this was post 9/11,
Right.
and they stopped doing tours. I guess at one point they used to do tours of the office. So I go up elevator opens to the lobby, and there's a nice couch and a potted plant, and there's
Right.
a life-size Spider-Man stand up,
Okay.
cardboard stand up.
Yep.
So you're in the right spot. And I guess because I had a suit on, probably the lady was like, who was at the front desk was like, "Hi, do you have an
Yeah.
appointment with somebody today?" And I was like, "No, I wish I did. I'm sorry, I don't. I was in the neighborhood and always wanted to see." And she was like, "Well, I appreciate that, but unfortunately,
Mm,
because of security these days, we can't have
yeah.
people come in." And I was like, "I understand completely." But so technically, I can say I did
Right.
set foot into the Marvel
Yeah.
offices. But yeah, you hear stories of guys a little bit older than me who in the business would just show up and go, "Anybody got a job? You got some
Yeah.
work for me? I'm a regular, and who's got a script? Who's
Yeah.
something like that." And that was
Steranko
the way
just
they
walked
found work.
in.
Yeah,
Ranko just walked in out of out of nowhere, and he was doing some animation stuff before that, and
right.
just said, "I got some stuff. I wanted to show some of my work," and he was able to get in, talk to Stan or his assistant Salbratsky. I don't know
Yep.
who saw his work first, but they said looked at it and they said, "I think Stan, I think you want to see this guy," and he got work quickly.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, Jim Steranko's a guy that has a lot of personality, a lot of character,
Oh yeah,
really unique history. And to this day, I mean, you see the guy at conventions and stuff. I remember seeing him always got the sunglasses on,
yeah,
always looking real clean, real dapper, got the hair done up. Like
yeah.
he was a whole thing.
And he wrote, he talked to a lot of the old time artists and writers. He did the history of the comics,
Yep.
which I got when I was a kid. My brother got it for my birthday or Christmas. We got this big, huge thing. It was a great history, learning about all the Golden Age stuff, the earlier artists and writers, creators. He did quite a bit of interaction with those folks. He admired a lot of those guys. So
And
got me interested. And
yeah,
that and All in Color for a Dime, which was a $1.50 book. I wrote about that on my blog too, and got that when I was like 10 or 11. And I
wow.
just opened up all this whole history of the Golden Age and Timely Comics and DC and Fawcett Comics. I'm like, I was just drawn in by that. I think I got more into that than into the latest comics as I got older, because that was more interesting to me, was the history of what went on, with these people.
It is incredible. And for folks who don't know, there's a lot of really good resources out there if you're interested in kind of the history. Usually you'll see like the history of Marvel or the history of DC. Sometimes you'll find things that are just general history of comics.
Yeah.
And a lot of those tend to dip into like the early newspaper strips, which
Oh,
is what
sure.
what the comic books were derived from. But if you're interested specifically in one or the other, there's a lot of great books. There's a couple. Just in my intro, I had some photos. Those are all things that I own. Those
Right.
books and stuff. I got to have at least 4 or 5 different history of Marvel type books, just alone. So check them out. They're great. If and again, really gives you insight into not
Yeah.
just the characters, but the characters that made the characters.
That's
Right.
right. There's so much history out there, so much to learn. So that's
Absolutely.
the great part of it. There's always something new I'm learning, you
Right.
know. And there's so many different companies and businesses, and going back from the early days of comics to EC to Warren Publishing to everything in between, and Charlton, which was a malign company, but they did a lot of different stuff and a lot of great artists. So I've pointed some of their work out from time to time.
Right.
There's just a lot besides the typical stuff that we know of. There's a lot of stuff of interest there.
Right. So we've obviously talked a lot about Spider-Man. We've talked a lot about Marvel because that's has to be arguably the biggest character that Steve
Oh,
Ditko worked on. I mean,
definitely still is today. I see kids with the T-shirts on. Everybody has Spider-Man stuff. That never goes away. Convention, Halloween time, I see kids with the biggest one is Spider-Man. Costumes are still huge. No matter what else is out
yeah.
there, it's Spider-Man.
I mean, Spider-Man was the company logo for
Yeah.
decades. I mean, so, but kind of steering away from Spider-Man for a minute, talk about, if you can, some of the other Ditko creations that you really like, and tell us a little bit about, maybe where people can find some information about them.
Well, there's so much stuff out there that he's done. I mean, he was working till he passed practically. I think he was a little ill last few months or so, but he kept doing his own stories and art for like 30, 40 years with Robin Snyder. Before that, he did work for DC, did work for Marvel again in the 80s. A ton of Tower Comics, all this work that the Creeper that he came up with in the 60s, Hawk and the Dove, and his own public work, private published work, Mr. A, and Static, The Mocker. He's had so many books that came out. There's such a large amount of work that he did. It's hard to pick a favorite. Doctor Strange I love also. His work on that, just amazing stuff. It's just, and he did the horror stuff that he did, or I should say the mystery stuff at Charlton in the 60s. Very detailed, thrilling work there that a lot of people don't take notice of. But if you look at the artwork in there, the stories there, some of the stuff is really around 68, 69, 70. Wonderful stuff. I saw that when I was a kid. I was in the store and I saw like the first issue of like Haunted #1. And in my neck of the woods, they weren't, it was hard to find Charlton. Right. And I think they got better distribution, say around 1970 or so. And then all of a sudden they were in more stores, more shops. And my brother liked the mystery stuff too. So anything with a Ditko cover on it, we would buy it. And that was great stuff, and the stuff that he did for Warren Publishing, the Inkwash stuff. I mean, he really just amazing that he was so talented and so detailed, and he did so much for so many different companies. It's a long run of work.
Yeah, I mean, all of us should be so fortunate to have a fraction of that kind of career. I mean, that's
Yeah,
incredible.
and he never
You know,
retired. He used to write the article saying, "I never retired from Marvel or DC or any. No one, I didn't get any more work from them. I didn't
right.
retire." Because they put out a blog things on online, and an article said he retired. He was still drawing every month. He was drawing. He was drawing on a regular basis. Every 3 months, another book would come out from him from Robin Snyder. He was
Wow.
working. He was doing the whole thing himself. Write, draw, ink,
Right.
letter. That was his thing.
I mean, that's the sign of a true artist, right?
Yeah,
Somebody who's multidisciplined and can do, all the tasks. That's amazing.
yeah, yeah.
And so you mentioned some of the characters there, so let's just go through real quick. So of course we have Spider-Man, we have Doctor Strange, as you mentioned. A lot of folks probably don't know the Creeper. Creeper was for DC, correct?
Yeah.
And still with DC. It's hard to
Right.
tell because DC's bought so many things. They're always like, did it start at DC or did
No,
they
it
just
started
buy
over
it?
there.
But yeah,
He did the Hawk and the
uh,
Dove there. He did
yeah,
the Stalker with Paul Levitz and Wally Wood
right,
inks. He did Shade the Changing Man.
yeah.
That was the last one he developed, created. I
And
think it
then
was after that kind of went down, unfortunately, at the time when the books were not selling.
was the
Implosion.
question for
The
Charlton?
question was for Charlton. It was done
Okay,
after Mr. A. It was a little bit lighter because it was Comics Code approved.
right,
So he did another version of Mr. A, as he said.
right, okay,
But Mr. A came first. But that was done for Wally Wood for Wits End, and that
right.
was a fanzine, a magazine publication that didn't have to go through the channels of the Comics Code.
It
And
was all black and white, right?
yeah, and self-published. They all own the
Yeah,
property there. So
yeah.
Wally Wood did that with Wits End.
I've seen some pages, some imagery from the Mr. A books,
Right.
and incredible in regards to just like I said, like illustrative.
Oh yeah,
Every
yeah.
every image is a complete full illustration, as opposed to sometimes you'll see this again if you are following, subscribe to my channel, you'll see my Spider-Man videos. Sometimes in comics, I mention this a lot, you're working on a page that's the paper's only 11 by 17, maybe a little bit bigger, maybe 14
Right.
by 17, but you're drawing panels and you might only have 3 to 5 inches worth of space in a panel that then gets shrunk down.
Right.
So how much detail are you going to put in, right? But with these Mr. A, it seemed like he had much more expansive room and he was really letting himself embellish
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
go wild with the illustrative nature of what he liked to do.
Definitely.
So it's a
Yeah, it was a different outlet, and he had more expression to do it the way he wanted and change it, like you said, alter it, do different techniques, storytelling, adapting it, making it bigger or smaller.
yeah. Now, as you said, it's not Comic Code approved. So if you do want to check it out, anybody who's watching the video, you can look it up. It's Mr. A, like Mr. E, but Mr. A.
Yeah, if you,
It's black and white. It's not necessarily all family friendly, but that's okay too. Art is art.
that's right. That is right, and it's available out there. You look it up there, and you'll see there's
Yeah,
publications. Robin Snyder also has stuff for sale, and there's others that are doing stuff now. So it's available. A
yeah,
lot of his earlier work. He did stuff at Fantagraphics that he republished it.
yeah,
Probably harder to find these days, but there's a lot of material out there now, and it will be republished
yeah.
in due time. There is some of that work is going to be coming out soon. So,
That's very cool.
and it's like stuff like this that was in one color Ditko package, which was a 86, 87. Again, all characters done with Robin Snyder that came out,
wow.
and he was doing this for many, many, many years. So, but he kept at work till 89 or so, 90.
Right.
Yeah, that's a long, long time of
That's a long
storytelling.
haul. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, do you know? I asked again, like, did we know? Did he didn't have any animation background? Obviously, there's some sort of illustration, but do you know what he was doing prior to 64 and when we see him at Marvel?
Well, he first started at a couple of smaller companies, and then basically Charlton was where he got most work. He loved working for them, and he went back to them whenever he could.
Right.
He just enjoyed it. He liked working with the writers. He liked working with Joe Gill, and he did some smaller stuff for smaller publishers in the B-53. I think he started around 53, and then he went to Marvel for a little bit in like 56, and then he came back again in like 59, and then he was there from 59 to 66. So 65, really, end of 65 is when he left.
Right.
So that's quite a long haul over there.
Would it
It
have been
started with,
timely when he started, or was it
no,
actually okay?
it
It was
was
Marvel by then.
well, they didn't have a real name. There was Atlas
Oh,
Comics at one point,
right.
and
Right.
then it was modified to become Marvel later on. But he
Right.
was at that, he's doing a lot of the 5-page backup stories. He was doing the mystery stuff, and yeah, he enjoyed that. He mentioned that a number of times. He enjoyed doing those type of stories.
That was a real interesting time in comics history because you had a big boom during, that World War II era,
Yeah,
right? Where you're seeing a lot of stuff, a lot of, your Captain Americas, Superman was fighting
yeah,
Nazis, Captain Marvel was fighting, the Axis. Um, and then after we sort of went, now what do we do?
yeah. Didn't sell. Then you have the romance, the war stories, the westerns,
Yep, it's really bounced
animated
around.
stuff,
Yeah.
and that's what was doing well until the superheroes came out back again and became popular. But there was
Yeah.
a long period where that wasn't the case.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people, again, who might know comics from today don't necessarily know that some of these romance comics, you see the covers of, oh no, Billy's in love with another girl. What shall I do? And those things were selling, tens of
Yes,
thousands of
and
copies. And
it started with Simon and Kirby. So
right, right.
amazingly, and he did stuff into the early '60s with romance.
Yeah.
Did a couple of romance stories for Charlton once in a while. Did some
Right.
war stuff. Did some westerns. Didn't do a
Yeah.
lot of that stuff. I stuck to the mystery mostly, but every once in a while, got an assignment. Did something else there.
Right.
So there's a lot of variety there. He did some humor stuff once in a while.
Right.
He did some illustrations for. He did an illustration for Music Magazine. I have that up. I could send that to you. On a Musician Magazine
Oh yeah.
about just to accompany an article
Okay.
about, and that's interesting to see because he does this whole musical thing, really nicely done. But other than that, it was all comics. He stuck to comics. He didn't do comic strips. He didn't do anything else. Just comics. No painting. Comics. This is what he wanted. Comics.
There you go. It's again when you get bit by the bug, as we started off at the beginning of the show.
Yeah.
Once you get bit, boy, it never leaves you. It's always a passion, and you love it.
That was
And
it.
now we have stuff like you've got the omnibuses there. We see more reprints. We
Oh
see
yeah.
more things coming out from the past, which is terrific. So the history isn't being lost, which is
There's a lot of it that's
a big thing.
which is good.
Yeah.
And they have them in these big books. They're preserved. They're taken care of. A couple of the editors I know put a lot of work into it. The guy that does the work at Marvel, very seriously, he does the best work putting these books together.
Yeah.
I help once in a while with the consulting.
Oh, cool.
Do some work if there's a letter or an inko you want to double check. I look at the stuff and try to help out as much as I can. I'm very good at identifying artists. So I used to draw when I was a kid. So I'd study the artwork and copy
Right.
the lines of Ditko, copy the lines of Kirby.
Yeah.
And as I wrote on one of my pieces, first time I saw criminals running, like Spider-Man #3 or whatever, it's like, you see the folds of clothing moving. And I said, oh, that's the way I move. You saw that's how Ditko did with the drapery and everything. He did it
Yes.
precisely.
Yes.
Not too
Very
bad
much
the
so.
artist did that.
Right. I mean, obviously, Jack created a shorthand for himself on what things would be, a texture or a shape or whatever. But Steve looked like he really was drawing almost like from life, like
Yeah.
from life drawing classes kind of thing. Like I said, how the drapery folds,
Yeah.
how your hands move. That's really, really key. But he also obviously had imagination. We can see when he does things like some of the technology, somebody has a ray gun or
Oh, sure.
a crazy Mysterio with crazy robots and stuff. And so he didn't shy away from that. He could do both equally well. Not everybody could.
Yeah, just doing a character like the vulture, the face, the expression, an older character, an older person. It just brought it to life.
Right. I just saw the other day a little clip of Stanley and somebody asking him about, what was your favorite villain? And one of the ones he mentioned was the Vulture. He said because he's probably the only character I ever created who was older than me.
Yeah, he was an old character. That was an elderly character.
Yeah.
But a great villain for Spider-Man because it's youth versus old age, elderly, and he was wise in some ways, and Peter Parker was still learning stuff, so he had to learn. And you see
Right.
that he uses the tools to figure out how to win sometimes, how to beat the character. It's always got weaponry sometimes, using his mind, not just fighting. That was a big thing for Ditko to think about what you're doing.
Yes, absolutely. So glad you mentioned that because I talk about that in a few videos. There's a trope that I refer to, which is the Spidey science trope. So Peter is not just a superhero. He is a super genius. He's very, very smart. And oftentimes he fails first, just trying to use his powers. Then he uses his mind and he finds a way to combine the two to be heroic. And I know, as you mentioned, that was a big philosophy. So Steve Ditko was very big on his personal philosophy and reflecting that in the characters that he drew.
The same thing with Doctor Strange, how to think, how to use your mind to beat the odds.
Right. Which, and when you go back to all these characters we just talked about that Steve Ditko did, you don't have characters like a Thor. You don't have the Hulk. No. You don't have those brute tank.
Well, he did the Hulk for a while.
He did the Hulk for a little while.
And he did invent a lot of stuff to bring him back. Make him popular. He said he and Lee had to work out an idea how to do it again when they wanted to redo it, and they had to change it slightly. He had him getting angry now. Why he became the Hulk at certain times. He also came up with some of the supporting characters. Came up with the leader. So he invented you'd like to revise characters that didn't work that well. With the Blue Beetle that he did for Charlton.
Yep.
He didn't like the original. He said, this could be done better. And they went to Dick Giordano. I'd like to, can we do this? He said, go ahead. And he revised and came up with some great ideas and concepts there. But, a lot of times you do a character that was, what could I do with this? I could do something better with it.
Right.
And he'd figure it out.
Clearly a guy who's more than just a artist, a true storyteller.
Yeah.
Right. So some artists can't, if they don't have it spelled out today in what we call full script with panel 1, panel 2, panel 3, panel 4, they're not telling that story. Obviously, Steve, but a lot of the older artists were truly storytellers because of the way they worked in that Marvel method.
And they collaborated. Once you're doing a story from a plot, you're putting a lot of work into it, whoever it is. And a guy like Kirby and Ditko, they had a lot of ideas. They had a lot of their own thoughts and ideas on how to put it together. Same thing with as I mentioned, with the first annual. They only talked in the office, according to Ditko. No plot synopsis there. They probably said, what do you want to do with this? And Lee probably said, let's get some villains together. Maybe they discussed who to use. And I want to see a guest star the characters. He hated using guest stars. But if you look at the book itself, they only appear for a panel or two. They might be in the background. He only met like one character. So Stan would have him fighting everybody. He did what he wanted, but he just made it low key. Thor is flying by. Doctor Strange is going past them, and Giant Man's fighting in the background, but they weren't interacting. I think he met Iron Man once, and that was it.
Yeah.
So he did what he wanted, but he didn't want to devote that much time to it. It would have been another 20 pages of that.
Right.
So basically, I think he did all when you were talking about the fishbowl and everything, I think he designed all the fighting things he probably did himself, came up with all the ideas for that. Because he probably just said, let's have a meet in battle. And I love doing the splash pages there, those great scenes.
Yes. And that was something that we hadn't really seen up until that first annual, right? There's so much I talk about with the pacing and the panel grids and stuff like that. And the annual gave him space to expand
advantage of it.
and do those amazing splash pages. So if anybody who's watching, if you haven't checked out my video on Amazing Spider-Man Annual #1, check it out because there is amazing artwork in there of these huge, each villain. Spidey fights a bunch of villains, as their spoiler of the plot. Each of it, sort of his past villains, kind of come back and gang up together. It's the first, what we call the Sinister Six today, and they all take turns kind of going after him, and he's got to beat one to get to the next one. Very classic, very classic Asian, Japanese kind of storytelling, right? You've got to work your way up to the big boss, and the big boss man is, in this case, is Dr. Octopus. And there's these amazing splash pages as we go, and it really you could see where Steve Ditko was able to really flex his artistic muscles and do some really nice stuff. But as you mentioned, we get to the end, and again, spoilers on a really on a 60-year-old comic. Dr. Octopus traps Spider-Man in a giant fishbowl and then jumps after him with scuba gear on. And it just made me laugh. I was like, this is the most ridiculous thing ever. Like, I get his name's Dr. Octopus because he has multiple arms, but in the water, really? And
Yeah.
But you gotta come up with something new. You can't
Come up with new ideas. Yeah,
every time.
Something different. Get your attention. That's for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, but probably the big panels is probably an idea he had because he knew an annual was something special. He understood that instead of it just being another issue of the book. Let's do something extra with it. That's why he put in on his own. He did the second annual himself. He had a Doctor Strange there. He had something he probably wouldn't do on a regular thing. They're very different characters, but he said, it'll work. We'll do it this time. Something special, something different. And it worked,
That'll be fun to review. I'm looking forward to that one for sure.
Really nice drawing too, and that one really nicely done.
Yeah. So we've gone about an hour, and I greatly appreciate the time. I want to give you an opportunity to anything you got going on in terms of your blogs. If things coming up, plans that you got that you want to promote, anything you want to let people know about.
Oh, nothing big at the moment. I'll probably do another annual posting or revise one of my old ones because every year I try to do something around June, July, that time of the year, because people like to reminisce about that aspect of comics. And it's always something of interest, and you never know what's going to hit me, and I come up with some other idea that'll come out there. So I enjoy it, and I do a lot of work with other people, consulting. I do a lot of stuff on the Grand Comic Book Database. I'm always adding, correcting, fixing up stuff, letterists, colorists, writers, artists, inkers. If I get information, I try to put it out there so people that did the work get the thanks they deserve, the respect, and the information is out there. So try my best.
Thank you for doing that, because again, that is work that not a lot of people are undertaking, but there were so many people, so many hands that went into creating the things that we love. And we see them in these huge giant movies, multi-$100 million movies, and at the end there's a little thing with some thanks.
Special thanks, and that's it. Yeah.
And it's usually that top person. You see your Stan Lees, your Steve Ditkos, your Jack Kirby's, people like that, but you don't always see all those other hands, the letterers, the colorists. Just that people don't understand the coloring aspect. So, real quick, and correct me if I'm wrong or fill in my gaps, but because I understand a little bit of it, but what they used to do is they used to have, if I'm not mistaken, it was a bunch of ladies. They had a bunch of women, mostly, and they would take the color proof. So somebody has basically hand colored with these sort of watercolorish, they're specific dyes. Here's what the color of the page should look like when it's printed up. And they would cut separations. And what that means is you print one color on the paper at a time, and the layers of ink build up to make colors. So if you want green, you put down some blue, you put down some yellow, the mix of the two makes a green, right? And these ladies, again, primarily, would have to go in and cut by hand these shapes of where the color was going to go and not go. An incredible craftsman type of work that often really goes underappreciated today.
A lot of it. Look, Maurice Evern was one of the primary colorist at DC Comics, and then later at Marvel.
Yeah.
She did a lot of coloring work, and some of it we know of, some we don't. But most of the time, she said she colored her own work, and she colored her brother's work. John Severin would come in there, and she did a lot
Yep.
of the covers, like in the '60s, late '60s, early '70s. And Stan Goldberg, who did a lot of the coloring for Marvel from the '50s on, and some of that's documented because he marked down what he did, what years he did it, when he did them.
Right.
But into the early Marvel superhero age, came up with the designs for most of the characters, had to be approved by Stan or Martin Goodman or whoever. But
Right.
he would come up with the color designs of most of the, and again, like you said, the contrast, the green, the purple. This he knew all about it. This is how to be done. He
Right.
was very aware of that.
Yeah.
With Spider-Man's costume, he was saying Ditko said he wanted like an orange for the, and then a blue, sky blue, some kind of a lighter blue for the Spider-Man, but they changed it later
Right.
on, and he didn't have the authority to make the final decision, but they made the darker red, and the blue was like a purplish,
Right.
and they changed it and altered it. But yeah, he did have some ideas on how it should be colored, and he did that with his other characters from time to time. He'd have a color guide, and some people followed it, some didn't. But Goldberg was really one of the main guys that was doing all the coloring for those early Marvels.
So I definitely want to go on record as saying, so Nick, you are telling us the answer to the story of, is Spider-Man's design red and black or red and blue?
It was supposed to be blue.
Supposed to be blue.
So it looks dark, it looks muddy back then, and
yeah,
it was a lot. There was probably a bit of black there, but it was red and blue. It was supposed to be red and blue, orange and blue, red and blue.
And then I want to shout out to Marie Severin as well, because Marie Severin is an unheralded hero of early Marvel comics. I mean, so for people who don't know, she was one of the staffers. She was at the office, and she was the person sometimes when something was late or something came in that was off model, or they needed an ink job, or they needed a color, something like that. They would go, "Hey, Marie." And she did more work that people don't know about, that you look at and probably attribute to somebody else, but really Marie's hand was all over that to get that to print.
And in the late '60s, early '70s, she was the cover designer for almost every cover. Even the stuff that Kirby was doing on Fantastic Four, whatever, like the last few late issues, she was doing stuff for, Gene Colan would do it, Sal Buscema, Gil Kane, whatever, but she would do a lot of the sketches for almost every cover, design it, and then give it to another artist, sometimes do it herself. That was a lot of work. A lot of work. There's a lot of books out there.
A lot of the house ads, those illustrated house ads.
Yeah.
Marie did those. I mean,
she was a very nice person too, a kind person. I wrote to her once years ago and asked about this issue of Kazar. I said, it's credited to Werner Roth. I said, but it looks a lot like your work in there. What happened? She said, well, could you send me the book and I'll look it over. She got the book. She sent it back a few weeks later. She went through the whole thing and told me, yes, I had to read a lot of the stuff needed a little punching up, because he didn't have the dynamic look of the Kirby work. So I did this and I did that. And it was very, very thorough and very kind that she spent the time to write me a letter back and explain everything.
That's awesome. And again, somebody who, I don't know, maybe, part of it was the times, of course. And unfortunately, somebody like Marie, as being a woman in a traditionally male dominated industry like comics, probably didn't get the credit that she deserved at the time. So anybody like this, where we can, bring credit to her and all the things she did for Marvel Comics, I'm all about it, because
I love the humor stuff she did. She had a great sense of humor. The Not Brand X stuff was just, I don't think she was into the superheroes as much as seriously some of the other artists. It was fun to her, It was like, okay, this is silly, and then she'd play it up in the humor stuff.
I remember, I think this was her, but I could be wrong. I remember as a kid, there was traditionally this holiday house ad for subscriptions.
Oh yeah.
And it was the Hulk in like a smoking jacket and the slippers by the fireplace.
That's her.
Yeah. And there you go. So that imagery has stuck with me all these years, so she was an incredible talent for sure. Well, Nick, again, this has been amazing. I really appreciate it.
Great
Thank
fun.
you
Thank
for
you.
taking the time. And yeah, so everybody, if you get a chance, go to Nick's blog, check it out. Is there a way for people to leave you
Oh, you
feedback
can
and
leave
stuff like that?
comments there, sure. I try to reply to everybody. I always think it's respectful and fair if somebody asks a question or writes in, you at least reply to them. So yes, I try to keep up
Absolutely.
with that, and any comments or criticism or ideas or things you have to say. Sure, I had a lot of good comments from people, and I appreciate it. So
Thank you. And Nick, I thank you so much for your support with me and my channel and the project that I'm working on. Thank you for participating and leaving your comments. I look forward to seeing them all the time. I'm bringing, my input, and then you're coming in and bringing in the stuff that I missed, things that I have no idea about. You're really helping to fill out and round out, what I'm bringing to these issues. So thank you so much for
well, you
for being a
deserve it.
participant.
You deserve it, first of all, because you're doing a thorough job, and it's something different, something unique. You don't get much of that out there, so it's very much appreciated.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying it. So I'm looking forward. So if anybody out there, if you see this video and you are subscribed, check it out again. Every Monday morning at 8 a.m., I've got a new Spider-Man art retrospective video coming out, and it's going all the way back in sequence. So if you missed any, you can go all the way back, start at Amazing Fantasy 15, and come all the way through and catch up on your history of Spider-Man with us. So
Exactly.
all right. Well, Nick, thanks again. Appreciate it. I
Thank you,
hope you have a
Jerry.
great rest of your evening. Thanks everybody who checked in and jumped in. Joey Lee, thanks for the comments. Joey Lee is a
Thank you.
great guy. Joey Lee is a terrific comedian. Highly recommend. Check him out. Super funny guy. Does voices. Does
Ah,
great stand-up work. Super awesome. And again, keep your eyes open, folks. We'll have more information coming to you soon from VTX Comics. Nick, thanks so much. We'll
thank
talk to
you.
you all again very soon. Thank
Take
you.
care.
Oh.